Hello there, lovely people. It's Alex from Nintendo Life here, and today we're going to be reviewing Metro Redux, which is it's a combination of two games in one package that can also be downloaded individually on the eShop, so it's a nice hot mess for a single review. As such, we're going to be reviewing both games in this video, but separately, give them their own score, and then give a sort of like an overall roundup for the whole kind of package that you get in one meaty go. These reviews were originally written by the extremely patient and lovely PJ O'Reilly and have been adapted for video by me. But anyway, that's more than enough waffling. Let's dive right into things. When Metro 2033 originally released back in 2010, it was something of a graphical powerhouse that really put the latest consoles and custom-built gaming PCs through the ringer. Rebuilt from the ground up in 2014 for this enhanced Redux edition, in order to bring its visuals and gameplay more in line with its sequel Metro Last Light, it seems almost impossible that we're now looking at such a heavyweight behemoth being ported successfully over to what is essentially a mobile platform. And yet, here we are! Not only has 4A Games managed to squeeze the entire experience onto Switch, but it has also done so with a port that sits right alongside another excellent survival horror title, Alien Isolation, as the most impressive we've seen on the console so far. This is the full-fat Metro 2033 Redux experience, looking almost identical to the enhanced PS4 and Xbox One versions of the game, and running at a completely solid and stable 30 frames a second in both docked and handheld modes. Then there's something in Russian I can't read. For the uninitiated, Metro 2033 is based on the 2002 novel of the same name by, Dmitry Glukovsky. I'm very sorry to anyone who actually knows how that's pronounced. It tells the story of the last remaining pockets of humanity struggling to survive in the aftermath of a nuclear war. Haunted survivors who eke out a rough existence deep in the subway tunnels beneath the irradiated ruins of Moscow. You assume the role of Artyom, an idealistic young ranger who's sent on a life-or-death journey through the guts of the metro system and a handful of ventures to the frozen skeletal remains of the city above in order to seek help for his beleaguered home station, Exhibition. It's a journey that sees you sneak, stab, and shoot your way through mutant-infested tunnels, battle across irradiated city squares, and take on post-apocalyptic Nazis on the way to save your home and find out the truth about the Dark Ones, mysterious visitors who've made their home on the ravaged earth above the metro and with whom Artyom seems to share some sort of psychic bond. Metro 2033's main strengths lie in how it manages to expertly combine slow-paced stealth and survival horror gameplay with moments of all-out action and carnage, while still making time to focus on its compelling central narrative. And, in its Redux incarnation, all of these elements have been polished to near perfection, with a host of changes that get rid of a lot of the jank that existed in the original version of the game. Here, Artyom's voyage benefits immensely from improved enemy AI and stealth mechanics that have been fine-tuned to fix the valid frustrations players had with the 2010 version of the game. Stealth now works as it should, weapons handle more smoothly, and there are easy-to-use radial menus that streamline the once cumbersome selection of the various gadgets and guns at your disposal. Visuals, too, have been completely overhauled with brand new character models, advanced lighting, dynamic weather, fancy particle effects, and reworked levels, all of which means that the whole thing flows much more smoothly. And amazingly, all of this has made its way over to the Switch version of the game intact and uncompromised. The haunted tunnels of the metro that you traverse are bursting with mutant and human enemies to take down or circumvent as you see fit. But there's so much more to think about on top of this. You'll need to constantly be aware of your surroundings with tripwires, traps, and irradiated sections both above and below ground that call for you to equip your trusty gas mask and constantly monitor how much more time you've got left with your current air filters. Light plays a huge part as well, with Artyom's watch indicating whether or not he can currently be seen by his foes. You'll need to move slowly and cautiously through areas, extinguishing light sources to stay in the shadows, and tactically removing enemy threats with silenced weapons or takedowns where possible. Doing everything you can to attract as little attention as possible is the order of the day, and tomorrow and yesterday, every day. There's also this massively satisfying sense of weight in how Artyom goes about his work, with detailed and believable animations, conveying the effort in his every action action, no matter how mundane it may be, maybe even flipping a switch. This physicality does wonders in drawing you totally into the slow burn tension of proceedings as you methodically creep your way towards your objectives. Indeed, it's from this slow, methodical gameplay that Metro 2033 derives most of its tension, and it's only when the game forces loud action segments on you that the intoxicating spell is temporarily broken. There are a handful of occasions where you'll need to face off against waves of mutants, and these are easily the weakest parts of the game, highlighting a combat system that doesn't lend itself particularly well to a full-on enemy assault, and enemy AI that does a much more convincing job of playing the unaware adversary being hunted from the shadows. Aside from all the stealthing and sneaking about the place, it's also the portrayal of life in these horror tunnels that Metro 2033 manages to pull off so well. As you journey from exhibition to your final destination high above Moscow, you'll happen across just little pockets of humanity, desperately trying to live their desperate lives, refusing to give up, holding on to a past and a way of life that has been completely nuked out of existence. It's often surprisingly stirring stuff, with families huddled together around campfires, ramshackle bars, bewildered and confused children, people just trying their best to normalize their terrible situation. The ugly side of humanity is here as well. Old conflicts and politics are still thriving even in the face of final annihilation. On top of the huge technical overhaul, Metro 2033 Redux also adds a new playstyle that gives players more choice in how they experience the game. Alongside the original's default survival style that sees every gas mask filter, every bit of ammo and equipment that you scrounge becoming incredibly invaluable, you also get a Spartan mode which apes the gameplay style of its much more action-orientated sequel. Weapons, ammo and basic survival kit are all found in plentiful supply, ensuring that you can bring the fight to both the mutants and human enemies at a much faster and more mainstream FPS pace. For us personally, the original slow, stealthy, save-scumming style where resource management and careful planning are the order of the day shows off the gameplay mechanics at their best, but it's still great to have the choice here, and the newer, more action-orientated style is clearly a gentler introduction into the world of Metro. Once you've chosen either of these styles of play, you then get to choose from 4 difficulty levels, from the base normal difficulty, which is no cakewalk, right up to the fabled Ranger Hardcore, which sees your entire HUD UI and all hints and tips entirely disabled, leaving you to battle it out using your wits alone with the hugely stripped back resources at your disposal. And this is, well, not hardcore, but the Ranger mode, I idiotically chose that. The aforementioned Ranger Hardcore mode is undoubtedly the ultimate test. An absolutely brutal way to experience the horrors of the Metro, but one that is definitely worth having a go at for those of you who like a proper, and we mean proper, challenge. In terms of this Switch port, as we mentioned, 4A has done a stellar job here. In both docked and portable modes, this one plays at a flawless 30 frames a second, with a portable resolution topping out at 720p, whilst docked sees the game stick to 1080p for the majority of its running time. And just a super little teeny tiny reminder that this is a game that runs at 900p on a base Xbox One. It is nothing short of miraculous just how well it performs here. It looks strikingly similar to its PS4 and Xbox One counterparts, and it's only on very close examination that you'll notice the expected texture and detail sacrifices that have been made to make this all possible. In portable mode, the smaller screen also makes everything look beautifully crisp and clear, with the inherent darkness of the game helping to hide the tricks and sleights of hand, such as some pretty heavy resolution scaling, that keep the frame rate running so smoothly during your adventure. It may be running at half the frame rate, but to be honest, the slow and heavy nature of the gameplay means that this doesn't really matter nearly as much as it might do in faster-paced FPS games. Controls feel tight and responsive, we didn't notice any significant input delays or lag during our playthrough, and those revamped weapons and gadget radial menus make selecting your guns, ammo, gas mask, or night vision goggles an absolute breeze. This Switch version also brings HD rumble and motion aiming to the table, with the latter really helping out with those exacting long-range night vision shots on pesky enemy snipers. One area that hasn't fared quite so well, however, is the loading times. For the most part, levels do load up fairly quickly, but there are occasions where we sat for a good long while, around around about a full minute for some missions to start up. It's not ideal for sure, but it is tempered somewhat by the fact that once you're in a level, reloads upon death are almost instantaneous. Taking into account everything this port manages to bring to the table, we're pretty much willing to let this one factor slide. Metro 2033 Redux is a top-class first-person shooter slash survival horror game, a breathless experience that's been almost flawlessly ported to the Switch by 4A Games. Artyom's desperate, haunting voyage through the irradiated remains of Moscow is every bit as engaging today as it was when it first released back in 2010, and this Redux version benefits massively from overhauled AI, gameplay mechanics, and visuals. In terms of first-person shooters or survival horror games on Nintendo's console, this is one of the very best. Metro Last Light Redux sees the first-person survival horror adventures of post-apocalyptic Metro Ranger Artyom continue in a sequel that seeks to up the ante in terms of big-budget bombast. There are lots of over-the-top on-rails sections here, and even a couple of traditional boss battles thrown into the traditional Metro mix, but it's when it returns to the slow and methodical stealth gameplay introduced by its predecessor that this title finds most of its success. The story here picks up exactly 1 year after the events of Metro 2033. Artyom is still struggling with the decisions he made in the first game, and is given an opportunity to put things right when a single surviving Dark One is found by the mystic Khan. Khan believes this creature could be the key to survival for mankind, while the Rangers, now fortified deep in the D6 complex you discovered in Metro 2033, are adamant that it must be destroyed at all costs. You're sent to find and kill the last remaining Dark One, but of course, things get complicated quickly. For the most part, the rhythm and gameplay here will be instantly familiar to those who played Metro 2033, with Artyom spending the majority of his time making his way very slowly through the game's trademark enemy-infested subway system, with some brief trips above ground to the irradiated ruins of Russia's capital. Indeed, both Metro Last Light and Metro 2033 play almost exactly the same in these updated Redux editions, with identical user interfaces, menus, and the ability to choose whether to play in either survival or Spartan modes. In total contrast to 2033, the standard mode of gameplay in this game is the one that they call Spartan mode in-game. Just like the other game, it gives you way more ammo, health, gas mark filters, the whole kazoo, but now you have the opportunity to run through the game in survival mode, which sees the more constrained resource management style of the first game implemented in this one. Personally, we're much bigger fans of playing these games in survival mode, even stepping up the difficulty to Ranger for a more full-on experience that gets the most out of the intricate stealth and combat systems at work under the surface, but it's brilliant to have these choices to suit whatever playstyle that you might prefer. As we mentioned, Metro Last Light goes big on action set pieces in comparison to the first game in the series, with mixed degrees of success. The combat system here is never really at its best when you're forced into ferocious gunfights. The whole thing works much better when it allows you the freedom to explore areas at your own pace, stealthily taking out your enemies and using your various gadgets and silenced guns to attract as little attention to yourself as possible. Fortunately, when the sequel does settle down into the series' signature stealth action, it absolutely trumps Metro 2033 with some delightfully large environments for you to fool around in, as well as one truly excellent section that calls to mind the old Half-Life 2 freewheeling vehicular levels as you get your hands on a busted up car on rails and can choose to barrel along to the next settlement on the subway line, or stop at a whole load of locations en route to engage in some lone survival horror action. In fact, this prolonged section may be a highlight in the entire Metro franchise. Each little area that you stop at is a self-contained playground jam-packed full of enemies to dispatch. These are tough fights that really put you to the test and reward you with gas mark filters, ammo, and new equipment that, provided you're playing in survival mode, will be absolutely vital to your continued success when you get further down the line. Thankfully, for as much as Metro Last Light does throw a few cumbersome boss battles and tedious on-rail sections at you, we hate you, Big Mama, it still manages to contain plenty of those extended playgrounds for you to just really sink your teeth into. Enemies have also had a nice overall here. Humans remain the standout foe, and you'll find yourself facing off against the big shaggy mutants from the first game, but they definitely display some better AI this time around, waiting for their moment to attack rather than just appearing en masse and making a beeline straight to the business end of your gun. A new light-sensitive enemy is also introduced, which can be forced off ledges using your torch, or even flipped onto its back, revealing a soft, delicious, creamy underside for you to pump a couple of shotgun rounds into. Delicious. Light, of course, still plays a huge part in proceedings here, with Artyom constantly required to snuff out light sources in order to keep himself appropriately in the shadows, as indicated by the helpful blue beacon on his trusty wristwatch. The heft and physicality of Artyom's movements also continue to ground the entire experience, with detailed animations for everything from snuffing out an enemy to changing your gas mask, changing your torch batteries, or even just climbing a ladder. All of these little details combine to give the game a real sense of atmosphere, sucking you right into its world and creating a genuine sense of tension as you go about your murderous doings. Indeed, atmosphere is something that this entry in the series continues to nail. Just like Metro 2033 before it, the world here is a beautifully realized creation packed full of mysterious, creature-filled tunnels and metro stations that are home to ragtag pockets of human survivors. You may be funneled through the populated areas as though you're on some sort of bizarre amusement ride, with no real opportunity to deviate from the set path, but there's a ton of detail packed in as you go about. You'll overhear tales of human misery and survival, see families huddling for warmth, children being entertained by street performers, and soldiers prepping themselves for whatever the Metro's haunted tunnels plan to throw in their faces next. These games really do feel alive with the detail, whether you're slowly creeping through mutant territory alone, inching your way across the frozen tundra topside, stealthily bypassing enemy checkpoints, or shuffling through one of the populated station areas. On the downside, Metro Last Light may have a couple of naff on-rails sections here and there are a few tawdry exchanges with the working girls of Venice Station which we're not sure should really have made the cut. We're also not big fans of the boss battles it introduces, but overall this is another excellent entry in the franchise that manages to nail that trademark mixture of stealth action, survival horror, and engaging story that saw the original become something of a cult classic. In terms of this Switch port, 4A Games has once again knocked it out of the park and is starting to interfere with the wildlife. Metro Last Light is a better looking, bigger budget game than its predecessor, and yet it still runs at a flawless 30 frames a second in both docked and handheld modes. With the resolution set at 1080p and 720p respectively, this one really does look phenomenal whichever way you slice it, but it's in handheld mode that impresses us the most. Playing Metro Last Light in portable mode, curled up in some dark corner with a pair of headphones jammed in your ears, it's a truly phenomenal way to experience this game's rich atmosphere and amazing audio. The smaller screen size also hides any pixelated edges and blurry textures, so the whole thing looks remarkably sharp. In fact, we're really hard pressed to find any major differences between this Switch port and the PS4 version of the game. Yes, there's the expected downgrade of textures here and there and some resolution scaling at work that keep the frame rate running smoothly, but it's the kind of blink and you'll miss it stuff, for the most part completely hidden by the dark nature of the environments in which the game plays out. This version also includes HD rumble and brilliantly implemented motion aiming controls, which really do help you out when you're trying to pull off some sneaky stealth longshots in a room packed full of enemies. If there's one area that did disappoint us in terms of this port, and it's the same as Metro 2033, it's the loading times. There are a handful of levels that can take around about a whole minute to load into. It's just a little bit painful, but thankfully once you're in a level, reloading upon death is basically instantaneous, which massively takes the sting out of the tail. Metro Last Light Redux is another strong entry in the Metro franchise that adds plenty of big budget bombast to Artyom's adventures, but truly excels when it decides to stick to the more slow-moving, methodical stealth action of its predecessor. It may not quite hit the highs of Metro 2033 and is dragged down in some places by ill-advised boss battles and a few too many hands-off on-rail moments, but overall this is an excellent first-person survival title presented in a fantastic port that's an absolute must-play for FPS and horror fans alike. So, in closing, Metro Redux is a top-notch first-person survival horror package that delivers countless hours of thrilling stealth combat, all wrapped up in a superb, delicious story. These are two of the most atmospheric games you're likely to play, set in a beautifully detailed depiction of a post-apocalyptic Russia. 4A Games has delivered a port that stands shoulder to shoulder with Alien Isolation as the very best we've seen on Switch so far. An almost flawless experience which should absolutely be right at the top of any FPS or survival horror fans' must-buy list. This right here is essential stuff.